To what extent can a team arrive to protect your star pilot? And what happens when the affected pilot is a legend like Lewis Hamilton? What was discovered after Monza's GP will leave you breathless. It all started apparently as a normal weekend. Fans dressed in red filled the stands with songs and flags, waiting for a performance worthy of the names that once shone in that same asphalt. But within the number 1 garage, something broke in silence. It was not a component of the car or a visible technical failure on track. It was the trust between pilot and team. Riccardo Adami, Lewis Hamilton's career engineer, one of the most experienced men in paddock, had been observing a repetitive anomaly for weeks. Small differences in the behavior of the car that did not have correlation with the registered data or with the decisions taken by the pilot. What initially seemed a minor mismatch or a track variation began to form a worrying pattern. A pattern that was repeated every weekend, especially in the key sessions, classification and race. For days, Adami tried to justify the inconsistencies. He reviewed telemetry, software, simulation records. He even thought of his own mistake or the possibility of an interference of the setup base. But upon arriving in Monza, there was no doubt. Hamilton's SF25 was being intervened without his consent. And not once, several times. In critical areas of the setup that directly hit the stability of the car. That was the drop that filled the glass. What nobody expected was that Adami, an engineer known for his discretion and institutional fidelity, broke the code of silence of Formula One. And did it publicly. He firmly declared that the interventions in Hamilton's car were neither accidental nor techniques. They were premeditated decisions executed without the knowledge of the pilot or the career engineer himself. The place of these statements was not an official press conference or an agreed interview. It was in an informal technical encounter filtered to specialized media where the truth began to emerge. There it was revealed that the changes were made during the early hours of Saturday with restricted access, and that affected critical points such as the rear suspension, the preload of the differential and the management height. Everything that Hamilton had meticulously perfected during free training was cancelled before classification. The news exploded as an atomic bomb in the paddock. Pilots, engineers and journalists began to whisper a word that in Formula One is avoided at all costs: sabotage. Because if the career engineer of one of the most laureate pilots in history states that his car was manipulated without authorization, we are facing a crisis of monumental proportions. The most disturbing thing about what happened with Lewis Hamilton is not only that essential parameters of his car were altered. The truly alarming was discovering who was behind. The modifications did not come from an error of the mechanics or a misinterpretation of the data, not even from an experimental strategy. These interventions were signed by Ferrari's Central Performance Group, an internal elite unit, autonomous, with full access to cars and acts outside the usual operational department. This group, theoretically designed to optimize the global performance of the team, crossed a line that no team should never cross. He acted against his own pilot. And not any pilot, Lewis Hamilton. The figure that had been announced as the cornerstone of Ferrari's rebirth, the man who arrived to return the title to Maranello after more than a decade of drought, was being sabotaged from within. The alterations were not subtle. During the Zandvoort GP, for example, Hamilton's SF25 was modified in 2 key points. First, the rear conduction height was reduced by almost 4 millimeters, a brutal difference in aerodynamic terms. Hamilton had worked during free training to find a perfect equilibrium point between traction and stability in parallel curves, where vertical and lateral rebound is critical. Upon reaching the classification, that balance had disappeared. The car was unstable, nervous, unpredictable. What had been a natural extension of the pilot's body became an enemy within the same cabin. Second, the preload of the differential was adjusted without authorization. This component is vital to control how the torque between the rear wheels is delivered. When modifying it, the behavior of the car in braking and closed curves becomes erratic. Hamilton reported, back after return, that he could not anticipate the rear axle response. It was as if he were driving a different car than he had tuned throughout the weekend. And meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Charles Leclerc enjoyed a perfectly calibrated car. His SF25 maintained the specifications as he had left them. Same height, same load distribution, same differential configuration. The contrast was devastating. Telemetric data showed a behavior difference between both cars that could not be justified by the pilot style or track conditions. It was an artificial difference created deliberately. They were not suspicion. They were made. The narrative inside Ferrari began to fracture. The mechanics began to murmur. The technicians to share doubts in the halls. Why were technical decisions without the approval of the pilot or the responsible engineer? Why did those decisions always affect the same car? What logic could there be behind destabilizing the 7-time world champion, especially when Ferrari needed each point, every return, every detail to compete for the title? The revelation of Lewis Hamilton engineer was not just a technical complaint. It was a declaration of war. One that exposes an awkward truth that Ferrari has been trying to make up for years. The team is not one. It is divided into internal factions, interests and loyalties operating under the appearance of unity. What we have seen with Hamilton is just the visible part of the iceberg, the tip that stands out in a sea of hidden tensions. Because while Hamilton's SF25 was systematically intervened, Charles Leclerc received an opposite treatment. Not only remained intact, but the entire operational structure seemed to work to guarantee maximum comfort and performance. Telemetry reports, simulator data and technical briefings confirmed it. Each adjustment, each component, each configuration in the Monegasco car went through its direct approval. No alteration without your knowledge. No anomaly. No mystery. That duality generated a toxic atmosphere in Maranello. A part of the team works with Leclerc's vision, protecting its status as the legitimate heir of the Ferrari project. The other, headed by Adami and Hamilton, began to feel isolated, operating under the constant suspicion that any technical advance could be reversed without prior notice. It is no coincidence that, in strategic meetings, the information that reached a garage did not always coincide with that of the other. Even emotionally, the difference was evident. While Leclerc was relaxed, backed and with total freedom to adjust the car to his liking, Hamilton seemed to be fighting a silent battle, not against his rivals on the track, but against his own shadows within his team. The gestures said everything. Tense looks on the wall, short radio conversations, frustrations contained after each session. It was not the body language of a pilot in full confidence. It was the language of someone who knows that he is being sabotaged by those who should defend him. And this has consequences, not only in car performance, also in the institutional balance of Ferrari. Because when trust breaks between pilot and engineer, between pilot and team leader, between one garage and another, the entire system becomes a minefield. Any decision can be interpreted as a political play. Any error, such as undercover retaliation. And in that context, competing for a championship is not only difficult, it is impossible. The real drama is in what is coming. Because this filtration is not going to be empty. The media are already investigating. The FIA could intervene if it is proved that there was manipulation without consent of the pilot. And within Ferrari, the consequences can be devastating. From dismissals in the technical area, to the possible resignation of key project figures. And if something like this happens, the question that is floating in the air is brutal. What will Lewis Hamilton do? What should have been one of the most anticipated associations of the decade between Ferrari and Hamilton is on the verge of collapse. And if this story continues as until now, it is very possible that we not only talk about a lost year, but the greatest institutional failure of Ferrari in the modern era. What happened in Monza has unleashed a storm that neither Ferrari can contain. It is not just the noise of the press or the whispers that travel the corridors of the paddock. It is the echo of a painful truth that rumbles in Maranello's very base. The most legendary team of Formula One is divided. And that division not only threatens its present, but calls into question all its future. The institutional silence before Riccardo Adami's statements is as eloquent as any official statement. Ferrari has not denied or confirmed the facts. He has simply kept an awkward silence. And that, in the language of Formula One, can be as devastating as a confession. Because when your career engineer publicly accuses systematic manipulation and does not contradict him, what remains is no doubt. It is confirmed suspicion. The question that many are asked now is inevitable. Can Hamilton continue in a team where they no longer trust those around him? The history of Formula One is full of noisy ruptures, of separations that marked an era. But none compares to what would mean that the 7-time world champion decided to cut his link with Ferrari in the middle of a season. It would be a lethal coup for the prestige of the Scuderia. A sign that even the best cannot save a team when it is broken inside. And beyond immediate drama, there is something even deeper at stake. Because what happened in Monza is not an isolated case. It is the symptom of a larger disease, Ferrari's chronic difficulty to function as a cohesive team. Over the years, we have seen how great talents have been devoured by the structure, how political decisions have prevailed over sports, and how internal pressure has suffocated projects that promised greatness. What do you think of all this? Do you think Ferrari really manipulated Hamilton's car? Is Hamilton condemned to fail in Maranello? Or is there still time to rebuild trust and save the project? Leave your opinion in the comments.